Good morning, grade 12. Good morning, colleagues. My name is Mpahama. I'm a subject advisor here in Muteo District. Today, colleagues, we are going to focus on the grade 12 mathematics paper 2 examination preparation. That we know very well that the paper will be written on the 16th November 2020. We are fully aware now that at the time the paper will start from 9 up until 12 o'clock, which is plus or minus 3 hours. So by starting from today, some of you guys started yesterday to prepare yourself for that. Please, you need to start to sit down for a minimum of 3 hours so that at least you are able to complete that paper on the 16th. Right, I think we are aware now, the grade 12, that for any mathematics paper, if we say that paper it's in the standard, then it means it must meet the following cognitive levels. The knowledge, which takes plus or minus 20%. And if we approximately the 20% of 150, then will be 30 marks. The learners are expected to recall here to identify the correct formulas and also to use the mathematical vocabulary correct. Those are the knowledge that learners need to demonstrate, when they apply or when they answer the paper next week, Monday. Then also on the routine procedures, the weight of that is 35%, which takes plus or minus 52, 53 marks. What is it that you need to do here? You must be able to prove, remember, especially in grade 12, there are 4 theorems that you must prove from grade 11, and there are 2 theorems that you must prove in Euclidean geometry for grade 12. Okay, these are the skills that you must be able to demonstrate under the routine procedure. The third one is a complex procedure, which takes plus or minus 30% of the paper. It's a plus or minus 45 marks. So this one, problems involved complex calculation and or higher order reasoning. So it means this one, there's not an easy road to the solutions. You need to apply some calculation, some skills to make sure that finally at the end you are able to get to the answer. So what needs to happen here, you require the conceptual understanding of the concept. You need to make sure that you understand what you are doing so that you are able to apply. Right. Then the last one then will be a problem solving, which most of the time we complain about it, and this one takes only 15% of the paper, which takes plus or minus 20, 22, 23 marks. Here is a non-routine problem, which are not necessarily difficult. The problems most of the time are mainly unfamiliar. Then it means we'll be seeing it for the first time. Higher order reasoning is expected from the learner, to respond to these questions. Please make sure that when you sit down, yes, you start with the knowledge. Which one? The 20% that you're talking about, that one, the 30% that you need is the one that you must make sure that you get it right. Okay. Right, let us look at the weightings of the topics. We know very well that in paper 2, we have 4 topics. In paper 2, we have 4 topics. It's the statistics, we've got analytical geometry, we've got the trigonometry, as well as Euclidean geometry. But what is the weighting? What is the mark allocation for each of these topics? Statistics will take plus or minus 20 marks. Plus or minus is 20, plus or minus 3. It can be 21, it can be 22, it can be 23, or it can be 18 marks. So that is what it meant by that. And then analytical geometry, plus or minus 40. Trigonometry as well, plus or minus 40. Then Euclidean geometry, then take a plus or minus 50 marks. So this weighting, this mark allocation, really, I think it will assist you in terms of the time that you're going to spend on each topic when you prepare for the Monday paper. Right. Please, before I start with the 4 topics, very important, take note of the following instructions. When you receive a question paper, please make sure that you read the instructions before you can do anything and follow the instructions. Please make sure that you read the instruction and follow the instruction. One that I want to highlight is that you'll see there's an instruction that says round off your answer to 2 decimal places unless stated otherwise. Please, every time you round off your answer to 2 decimal places, then unless on that question they said round it off to 1 decimal place, 3 decimal, that's when now you'll follow the instruction on that question. But if there's no instruction, then your answer must be rounded off to 2 decimal place. Then the information sheet, that will be the second one, the formula sheet. We have it at the back of the question paper. Paper 1 English, paper 2, the end of paper 2, the English one will have it, and the Afrikaans one as well. You will have that formula sheet. Please make sure that you know the paper 2 formulas, then you know where they are. Please look into that. And then I must also add to say there are formulas that are not in the formula sheet that you know. Please, every time when this is a time to start with those formulas, write them in the formula sheet so that by the time we get to those questions, then you have your formula written down. Right, let us look at the statistics. Statistics takes plus or minus 20 marks, that like I indicated earlier on. Right, we start from grade 10. We start from grade 10, but it's fine. Grade 11 concept to be mastered, grade 10, 11 concept to be mastered. You know very well that we need to know what is an histogram. We need to have the picture of that in our mind so that at least we can be able to apply. This is the graph of the histogram. Please, you can get a question like this one where the graph is given, then you need to interpret the graph. The age group the number of learners that fall within the age group of 0 to 10, only 1, right? Can you see that? And then the one that fall between 10 and 20, then it's only 3. So can you see that? You need to be able to interpret that. It is very important. So this is what we are referring to. So the one that falls here, only 3. The one falls between 20 and 30, it's 6. So this is the information that you did, especially now when you go to the cumulative frequency graph. You must be able to read that. So that is a histogram. The second one is a frequency polygon. So this is the graph of that. Please make sure that you familiarize yourself with it, especially when it comes to the part of the interpretation. We need to know to read the information from the graph. And then the last one is a cumulative frequency curve. Then how does it look like? This one we are familiar with it. Then it's a graph that forms something like an S shape. And very important as well, we need to read and interpret the graph. These are the most important graphs that we're going to talk about. Of course, I cannot forget the linear because we're going to talk about the regression as well. But keep in mind these 3 graphs. Right, we've got measure of central tendency. Remember, here we are dealing with the grouped data as well as the ungrouped data. Fine. When we look at the measure of central tendency for ungrouped data, we are referring to what? We've got a mean. We must be able to calculate the mean. How do I calculate the mean? I know that the mean, which is, we use the symbol here, we're using the x with that in top, equals to the sum of all the values. It means here we need to we add all the values, then divided by the total number of the values. Very, very important. And therefore, you just simplify it, and then from there you get to the answer. Yes, we can use a calculator to determine the mean. Very, very important, and that is a skill that we really, really need to master. But I must also advise my grade 12 learners that, you know, yes, it is allowed to write the answer only, but to some extent, showing that sum, you add all the values, they give you 210, then divided by 7. It's very important. Why am I saying that? To some extent, your addition are not correct, right? Your additions are not correct, but then you divide it by correct and you might get 1 out of 2. So very important, try to show the sum of all the values, then divide it by 10, and then after that, that's when now we can give your answer rounded off to 2 decimal place. Right, the second one, you've got a mode. We know that the mode is the value that appear most frequently in a set of data points. Very, very important. The one that appears most, that is the one that we will call it as a what? As a mode. Then from there, we've got the median. Remember, we're still busy with an ungrouped data. The median is the middle number in a set of the data points, and which is when we determine the position. Position of the median is a half into n plus 1, right? If we use the formula, your answer will be the position. Then we still have to determine the median. Very, very important. Right, where n represents the number of values, if you've got 10 values, if you've got 10 scores, then your n will be 10. Now, if the number of scores are odd numbers, then the median is part of that set If n is an odd number, then the median is part of that data set. It means you will find the median in the score if you've got an odd number. But if it is an even number, the median then will be an average between the two middle values. Then I will do an example of that so that at least we can remember very well what is it that we are talking about. Please keep it in mind when you use the formula, because to some extent, some of grade 12 learners, they would use the formula and then they leave it like that, forgetting that when they use half into n plus 1, then they are determining the position of what? The position of the median. Please, two things to remember here. Half n plus 1 gives you the position, then you still have to write it down the what? You still have to write it down the median from the score. But what is important is, before you can write the median, you need to make sure that your data is always arranged in ascending order. Very, very important, from the lowest to the highest. The mean is not a problem. You can add the score the way they are. The mode, you just check the one that appear most. But when it comes to the median, before you can determine the middle one, then, or before you can use the formula to get the middle one, you need to make sure that you arrange your data in an ascending order. Very, very important. And then I must also say, maybe we need to take an example here. If we have the score of the learners, then one learner obtained 24, then the second learner obtained 27, and the third learner obtained 30, then we've got 31, then the other learner obtained 35, then we've got another learner who obtained 38. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Let's take the other one, obtained 41. Right. These are the marks of mathematics learners in a class. Now, when you look at these marks here, you find that the number of learners that participated here, there are how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We've got 7 learners here. Now, I want to determine the what? I want to determine the median. We said that the median is the middle one on this data. But what's important is, first we need to make sure that this data is arranged in an ascending order. Fine, we are fine with that. Now we need to check the middle one. The middle one then will be the fourth one. So we've got 24, 27, 30. This then will be the middle one, 31. So that is why we said now, if you've got the odd, then the median will be part of the data. But if I add 11 here, if I add 11, for example, then I've got now the even, right? Can you see? If I count how many learners do I have? I have 8 learners. Now, let's see. We said if there were 7 learners, then the median will be 31. It's a part of the data. But now, if there are 8 now, what's going to happen now? Then it means half of this then will be 1, 2, 3, 4. We're going to take 30 and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 31. Then it means we need to determine the average of the two, whereby the Q2 is equals to 30 plus 31, then divided by 1, divided by 2. That is why we said it will be the average of the middle two scores. Then we add and then we divide it by 2. So you find that I think the answer will be something like 30,5. Then which will be the one here. So you see now that average name is not in the data, right? Just the average of the two middle values there. Please keep that in mind. Okay, right, now let us continue. We spoke about the mean, we spoke about the mode, we spoke about the median. Right now, the next one then is we need to look at a 5-number summary. We need that, especially after now talking to the median. Right, from 5-number summary, we know we have the minimum value. Then we know that we have the lower quartile, which we call it Q1. We know that we have the median, which sometimes you call it Q2. And then we have the upper quartile, which is Q3. And the maximum value is the highest value in that score. Right, then this is information that we are going to use now to draw the box and whisker plot. Very important. How do I draw that? Remember, a box and whisker plot is a visual representation of the 5-number summary. What is happening here is that you see that Q1, Q2, Q3 is dividing the data into 4. Right, we'll have the first quarter of the data. We have the second quarter of the data, we have the third quarter, and the fourth quarter here. Very important. It means from here will be 25, 25%, and here will be 25, which will give us the 50. That is why it's a half of the data. And the 75 will be at the upper quartile, and then 100 then will be at the maximum value. Keep that in mind. This, the box and whiskers plot, is just a visual representation of the 5-number summary. Please remember, you have the lower quartile, very important, the minimum one, the minimum value, which is the lower extreme, that is the lowest one in that data, and then we have a lower quartile, which is our Q1. Then from there we've got the median, then we've got the upper quartile as well as the maximum value. Very important, right? Here we only spoke about the median. Right now, on the first one, on the first data, the 24, the 27, 30, 31, 35, 38, and 41. On this one, the minimum value is equals to 24. That is the minimum value, right? The lowest one. And then from there, the maximum will then be what? Will then be 41. Thank you. Right, then we need now to determine Q2. That is where we are going to start now. Is a middle value, which we said is equals to what? 31, because now our scores now it's odd. So that is very easy to pick the median. Right, from there, we can now determine Q1. What is Q1? Q1 then will be the median of the lower half. No, it will be the median of the lower half. Then we look into that, then it will be what? It will be, the middle one will be 27. Therefore, we have 27. And then Q3, we focus now on the upper half now. Then we check the middle number on that. Then we find out that is equals to 38, right? This is how to determine what? This is how to determine the 5-number summary. Very, very important. Please make sure that before you do that, I must repeat, I must say that it's very important to arrange your data in ascending order. Right. Now, if I was to look at this one as well, where we have 11, 24, 27, 30, 31, 35, 38, 41. Right. We said the median Q2 is equals to 30 plus 31 divided by 2, which is around 30,5. Thank you. Now, what is Q1 then? When I determine the Q1, very important. Now, remember 30 is not the median, right? We used 30 to get the median, but when I determine Q1, I will also use 30 as well. Now, it means I will focus now on the first half of the score, which is from 11 to what? To 30. How many scores do I have? I have 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got 4 scores. Now, I need to determine the median of that. What is a half? Then the middle of that will be 24 as well as 27. Then I take the 2, 24 plus 27. Then I divide it by what? By 2. Then I will get the answer. Very, very important. This will then be your Q1. Then you do the same with Q3. You say Q3 is equals to, you go to the top half, then 31 is included up to 40, up to 41. Therefore, it means now if I take 31 to that, then I've got 4 scores on this side. So the middle one then will be 35 plus 38, then divided by 2. Then we get the answer. Very important. Please, you need to make sure that you practice the 2 where you have the odd numbers on that scores, or when you have what? Even. Please, very, very important. Make sure that you practice that. Okay. Right. Now, let us move now. This is the box and whiskers. Then from there, we are expected to do what? We are expected to be able to comment, but we'll talk about that. Now, we've got the measure of dispersion from this data. Then what is important here, we need to remember the range. What is the range? Range, we are not talking to the functions here. The range is the maximum value minus the minimum value. Yes, we know that, guys, we have a range in functions, paper 1, right? We have range in function paper 1, but the range under statistics is we've got the maximum value minus the minimum value. You need to understand that. Very, very important, right? The next one we have interquartile range. Interquartile range. Remember, we've got Q1, Q2, Q3. when you determine the interquartile range, then you take Q3 minus Q1. Very important. It means you'll be dealing with what? 50% of data. Remember I said now those quartiles divided the data into 4 quaternaires, 25, 25, 25, 25, which at the end of the day will give us the 100%. Right now, at the moment, we are talking to the 50% of that data set. Then from here, we have semi-interquartile range. How do we determine that? Semi-interquartile range is a half of Q3 minus Q1. So it means I take Q3 minus Q1, then I divide it by what? I divide it by 2. So they are saying it's a good measure of dispersion for the skewed distributions. So very important, let us look into that. So please remember the range, maximum minus the minimum, interquartile range, then very important is Q3 minus Q1, and therefore we have same interquartile range. You take your Q3 minus Q1, then you divide it by what? We divide it by 2. Okay, right, let's look at the indicators of position. Now let's look at the indicators of the position. We have the quartiles, I said earlier on. The 3 quartiles divided the data into 4. The 3 quartile Q1, Q2, Q3, they divided the data into 4. Right, we've got Q1, which is the lower quartile or first quarter of the data. First quartile of the data. And then Q3 is the second quartile or the median. And then Q3 there is upper quartile or the third quartile. So please keep this in mind. Then after this one, we have percentile. Very important to remember. Sometimes get the question to say determine the 75, the 75th or the 50th percentile. You need to know what to do. So the percentile here indicates which percentage of the data is below the specific percentile. Very important. Indicate which percentage of the data is below the specific percentile. So when you talk to 25 percentile, we are now referring the percentage that is below to 25%. The same applies 50 below half of that, and then 75 below half of 75, which when you go to the quartile, then will be what? Will be below the upper quartile. Very, very important to look at the two together. Right. We still under statistics where we have plus or minus 20 marks. Now the next one is to look at the variance and the standard deviation. We have the measure of dispersion around the mean, very important. The variance, remember, measure the variability from average or the mean. This is how we calculate the variance. Yes, not always we'll get a question on this, but we need to make sure that we are aware we know how to calculate the variance. First, we need to have the mean, which is the average. Then from there, we minus the mean from each number in the data set, and then we square the results. Very important. And then after doing that, then the averaging the squared difference, then will give you the variance. Then we go for the standard deviation. The standard deviation is the amount the data value or class interval from the mean of the data set. Very, very important. That is the amount the data value or the class interval differs from the mean of the data set. So the formula, but now of late we're not using the formula, we use the calculator. Very important to master the skill of using the calculator. Guys, we need to practice that. It is very, very important. Right, we'll talk about that before the end on how to get the standard deviations on the calculator. Okay, right. We need to talk to the symmetrical or the skewed data. Very, very important. Right now, when you talk to the symmetric, it means a symmetric data has a balanced shape with the mean, median, mode closely together. You can look at the sketch. Now, the mean is equals to the mode is equals to the median. So we say the data is symmetrical, right? And then when you come to this side, the skewed data is spread more towards one side or the other. So when we say the data is skewed to the left, then it means it is negatively skewed if the tail extends to the left. Now you can look at the tail, it's extending now to the left. Then when you comment, you see is it negatively skewed or skewed to the left. Look, we've got the mean there, we've got the median, we've got the mode, right? But now, When you look at the one that is skewed to the right or positively skewed, then we say the data is positively skewed if the tail extends to the right. You look at the tail now, it is extended to the right. Very, very important, right? But I must also indicate that we do sometimes get questions to say, after we have sketched the box and whisker, very important, now we get a question whereby we need to do what? Whereby we need to comment about the data. Very important. Then from there, if the median is at the middle, remember this is your Q1, right? This is your Q2, and this is your Q3. Then we've got the maximum here, we've got the minimum here. Right now, if the data, the median is at the middle, then it means we say the data is symmetrical, right? Then, but the second, this is the first one. Then the second one, right, on the same one, okay, then we'll have a minimum there. Then we've got our box. Then the whisker on the other side. Now looking at this one, the more data is on the right-hand side of what? The right-hand side of the median. Therefore, we say now the data is skewed to this one is skewed to the right. Very, very important. And then the last one then will be, then we've got our whiskers. Thank you very much. Here we are. Then from there, when you look at this one, then we find that now more data is on the left-hand side. Then we see that the data now is skewed to the left or negatively skewed. Please look at this one as well so that we are able to comment about the skewness of the data after you have drawn the box and whiskers. Okay, right. Now we look at the measure of central tendency. Now we started with ungrouped data. Now let us look at what is happening for the grouped data. That is very, very important. Right. We said we have mean on that side, right? On ungrouped data. For the grouped data, we have estimated mean. Very important. We have estimated mean. Now, how do we calculate the estimated mean? We take sum of all frequencies multiplied by the mean value, right? Sum of all frequencies multiplied by mean value divided by the total number of the frequency. Where that we've got estimated mean, then n is a number of values. Okay, right. Now I've got an example here. We've got the class interval. You can see now this is a grouped data. We've got the class interval 0 to 10, and we've got 3 participants there. 10 to 20, we've got 7, and 20 to 30, we've got 4. So the total of frequency is 14. It means we've got 14 participants. Okay. Then from there, we need to have the midpoint. Very important. You need to have the midpoint. How do you determine the midpoint? 0 plus 10 divided by 2 is 5. And then that is 10 plus 20 divided by 15 is equals to that, divided by 2. So not 15, it's supposed to be 2 here. 20 plus 10 divided by 2 is equals to 15. And then 10 plus 20 divided by 2 is equals to 20, 25. You just add in your lower limits and then the upper, then divide each by 2. Very, very important. This is not a 15 here. It's supposed to be what? It's supposed to be 2, so that we get 15. Okay, right. This then will represent your midpoints. Then after this one now, we take now the frequency times the midpoint. It means it will be 3 times 5, which 5 is a midpoint, is 15, and then 7 times 5 is 105, then 4 times 25 is 100. Now from there you add frequency times the midpoint, gives you 200 and 220. Now if I were to determine the estimated mean, then the estimated mean is equals to 220, right? 220, then I divide it by the number of frequency, which is what? Which is 14. The total number of frequency, 14. Then I work it out. Please, very important. There is no way that you can calculate the estimated mean, because if you are using only the frequency, you will get the answer as a 1. You need to have frequency times the midpoint, and then you add your frequency times the midpoint. You take the sum of that divided by the total number of the frequency. Okay, right. Then we've got the modal class interval. For the modal class, we have mode on ungrouped data. For the grouped data, we have modal class. Now, what is a modal class? The modal class interval is a class interval that contains the greatest number of the data points. Very important. Now, we look at the interval that contains the highest number of the data points. Now, in this case, which one now will be the modal class? Of course, now this one is 3, 7, 14. Then it means the modal class interval will be where x is greater or equals to 10 and where x is less or equals to 20. Why are we taking 10 to 20? It's because there is the one that even the highest greater number of the data points. That's where our modal class will be. Right, then we have also to calculate the median class interval. Right, the median class interval, how do we get that one here? Yes, they can ask you to determine the median class interval, and they can also ask you to estimate the median or determine the median of the grouped data. Right now, the median class interval is the interval that contains the middle number in a set of data points. Very important. Now, it means for me to get the median class interval, then I will check the one that contains the middle number here. It means out of 14, the half of that is 7. So you take a 3, then that is 10. Then it means the median class interval also be at 10 to 20 because the middle number is at this interval here. Keep that in mind. Right, okay. So this is the cumulative frequency. That is the one that you used most of the time to determine the Q1, to determine Q2, to determine Q3, to determine the percentiles as well, 75% of 70% percentile of the data. Then we can also use the graph to determine that. In this case, if I were to determine the median of the grouped data, how do you still remember very well that, you know what, I just take a number of this is 80 plus 1, then divide it by 2, then it gives me 40,5 roundly to 41. Then from there, I will draw the horizontal line to the graph. When I get to the graph, then I draw the vertical line to the x-axis. Now, when I get here, then I will read that point from the graph on the x-axis. Very, very important. So please keep that in mind. Right, this is an example. This is an example, but before I talk to that example, remember we also have what? We also have an outlier. Nay, we must be able to talk to an outlier. How do we determine the outlier? You know, we take Q1. We take Q1 minus 3 over 2, which is 1,5, multiplied by interquartile range. And then from there, we also take Q3 plus 3 over 2, multiplied by interquartile range. This is the interval that we're working with. Anything that is lower than this one, then will be an outlier. Anything that will be greater than Q3 plus 3 divided by 2 times the interquartile range, then will also be then an outlier. Please keep that in mind. Okay, please practice. Make sure that you look at that. Now, because of time, I won't be able to do the questions, but get the question similar to that one that talks to the ungrouped data where you are now determining the mean, you determine the interquartile range, you determine the standard deviations, and then I must also indicate that when you look at 2.2, there are to some extent whereby you will be asked to determine the number of learners that fall within one standard deviations to name the color. Very important. Now let me read 2.2. It says the standard deviation of the time taken by the girls is 5,94. How many girls took longer than one standard deviation from the mean to name the colors? Right, now the question comes differently, right? Okay, first we need to remember, if we are asked to determine how many learners that scores their mathematics test is within one standard deviation, we need to remember that we have the interval that you're working with. The interval that you're working with is what? We have the mean minus the standard deviation, right? We have the mean minus standard. Now we are talking to one standard deviation. That is why the coefficient of here is 1. Then we also have mean plus the standard deviation, right? Any scores that fall within this interval here, then we can just count them. Then we'll be responding to the question. Right now, if they say the one that fall outside one standard deviation, then it means we are going to focus on everything that is not inside the interval 23,4 to what? To 74,8. Then it means anything from 23 down, anything from 75 up, then will be the outside one standard deviation. Right now, now of late, now we have a question where it says determine only the one that are more than one standard deviation or less. That means if they want only the one that are more than one standard deviation, then we focus mainly on the top part, then we count them. They're less than one standard deviation, then we focus only on the lower part of that. Please be very important here. Make sure that you read the questions, make sure that you understand what the question wants. Remember I said this is within one standard deviation. If they talk to two standard deviation, then you say it's a mean minus 2 standard deviation, then also a mean there plus 2 standard deviation. Then the 3 as well, you just multiply the standard deviation by what? By 3. Then, but what's important is read the questions. Very, very important. Read the question. Okay, right. From there, then we have also need to know how to sketch the cumulative frequency graph. Very, very important. We have the class interval. This is under the grouped data. There we are, 0 to 15, 15 less than 30, 30 to 45, 45 to 60. Then the frequency there, we have 0, 14, 22, 30, as well as 14. Remember, we can get the question that asks you to determine the modal class, and we say this is the one that has what? The highest, the greatest number, or the score. Okay, right now, but at the moment the focus is on what? At the moment the focus is on the sketching or drawing of a cumulative frequency. Right, what do we do? First of all, we need to complete the cumulative frequency. We need to determine the cumulative frequency. How do I determine the cumulative frequency? The first part, I've got a 0 there. It's a 0. To some extent, sometimes you get 2, you get a 5. Number of learners participated, there are 5, then we'll have 5. Then the cumulative frequency will be 5 if it's 5. But now, since it's 0, then you get a 0 on this side. Right, now the second one, 15 to 30, we have 14. Right, we have 14. Then the cumulative frequency there is what? We take a 0 plus 14, there is 14. Very important to understand what you are doing. You took 0 plus 14, then it's 14. Now the next one, between 30 to 45, equal 22. But how do I determine cumulative frequency? Then I take what? 14 plus 22, then will give me 30, 36. I do that. Now for the next one, then I take 36. I take 36 times 30, will give me 66, and then after that I take 14 plus 66, then will give me 80. Right? It means these are the number of participants on that research. Yes. Then from there, very important to remember the points that I'm going to use on the graph points. Then it means remember when we are sketching the cumulative frequency, we use the upper limits. We've got the lower limits on this side, we've got the upper limits here. So it means for the x, we are going to use the upper limits, the 15, the 30, the 45, 60, 75. But these upper limits, we use it together with what? With the cumulative frequency. So 15 will go with 0, 30, 45, 45, 36, and then 60, 66, and then 75, 80. That is the highest, the maximum one. So then after that now, we can now represent the information now on the cumulative frequency curve. This is how the information will look like, right? At the 15 there, we have a 0. Then at 30, we have 14. We have yes. Then you have 14. Then you have it like that up until you get to the last one where you have 8. Very, very important. But in a case where between 0 and 15 you've got a 1, then it means your graph will start somewhere here in the middle. So what is important is you need to make sure that you have your graph grounded. You need to make sure that this one is well grounded, starting from exactly on the x-axis. We cannot have the graph started up there. So if I need to ground the graph, if here I had a 2, then it means for the very first one here to ground the graph, then I will use the lower limit here. If it's not a 0, then we find that maybe it's a 5. Then I will count it at a 5 as well as what? At a 5 as well as 0. Yes. Now the graph here, just to give you the picture of how to sketch the graph. That is why you find that plus or minus does not exactly refer to that. But you need to know how to sketch the graph. Very important. Now, like I was saying on this side, the x-coordinate represented the upper boundaries of the class interval, and the y-coordinate represented the cumulative frequency. Right now, let's look at the interpretation part of it. Now, it means if we need to interpret from the graph, now how do we determine the median? Right. Remember, on ungrouped data, we spoke to an even number, or we also have what? We have the odd. But if there is an even number of the data items, now in this case we have 80, right? In this case we have 80. Now what must happen? So the median lies midway between the two middle values, right? Yeah, it will be 40 on this side, 40 on the other side, right? Therefore, the median is a half between the 40 and 41. So find the value on the y-axis, and we draw a line from that point to determine the value on the x-axis. I repeat. Right now, if we've got the even data items in our sets, now it means now the median will lie between the two middle values. On the example that I did, for an example, find that it's between 41 and 42, then it means the median will be between those one. It can be 41,5. In this case, it is 40,5. That is the position of that. But what do we do? For us to determine the median, we need to draw the line from the y-axis where the y is 40,5. We draw that line to touch the graph. Then after that, now we draw the vertical line to the x-axis. Then we read what? We read the median on the x-axis. Very, very important. Right, what about the quartiles? Similar to the method used to find the median. We're going to use the same method. Therefore, we can now be able to determine what? We can now be able to determine the lower and the upper quartile from the graph. Remember, we said we have the formula that we can use to determine the position, whereby we say the position of the median, the position there, it will be, the position of the median will be half n minus 1. This is the position of the median. Very important. This is the position of the median. Right, and then after that, position of the median, we can also be able to determine the position of Q1. How do I determine the position of Q1? It will be because the data has been divided into 4. Then it will be 1 over 4 n plus 1. Then the n is a number. In this case, it will be 80. And then how do I determine Q3? Q3 then will be what? Q3 will be then 3 over 4, then n plus 1. Yes, n plus 1, not a minus. Okay, please keep that in mind. It's a half into n plus 1, 1 over 4 n plus 1, 3 over 4 n plus 1. So this one is the upper quartile, this one is a lower quartile, then the median there is 1 over 2. Why 1 over 2? Then remember it's a 2 over 4 into n plus 1. Then 2 divided by 4 is exactly the same as what? It's exactly the same as 1 over 2. Right, then the last one then will be the percentiles. Now, how do I determine the percent? Remember when I was explaining those positioning, then we said now the median and the quartile divided data into 50% and 25% respectively. Should you need to calculate the different percentile, this can be done by calculations or read from the graph. Now, if for example we have a question says calculations of a 90th percentile, how do we do that one? It means we just take 0,9. How did I get 0,9? It's 90 divided by 100 times 80. Then it's equals to 72. Right, then we read that. It means I will go on the y-axis here. I look at 72. Then from there, I go to the graph. Then the 90th percentile then will be on the x-axis. Then from there, so the 90% of the data is below 72% value, which will be in the last class interval. Please let us try to practice the interpretation of the graph talking to the median, including the Q1, Q2, Q3, then the percentile as well. And read the question with the understanding. Very, very important. If to make an example, these are the number of learners. Say, for example, the time they spent watching TV. To some extent, if we have given that how many learners have watched TV more than 5 hours, it means in this case you're going to start from the X and then you read on that. So if it is more, then for example, if you've got 60, then it means you must find the difference between 80 and 60, then it will be what? It will be only 20 learners watch that TV more than what? More than 5 hours. Read the question and make sure that you understand the question. Right, now this is examples of a grouped data. Please make sure that you practice, especially when it comes to the part of the estimated mean, because that is where we make a lot of mistakes. So how do you calculate the estimated mean? Very important that you need first to determine the midpoint, and then from there you take the number of children, which is X in this case, which is the frequency, then time is the midpoint. Then from there you can just find the cumulative frequency, then you draw the graph. Very, very important. Now 1.5, use the graph to determine the median time taken to complete the pizza. Now you know how to determine the median now. You know how to determine the median. Okay, right. We also have grade 12. Remember from grade 11, grade 12, we spoke about the scatter plot. We've got a positive linear correlation. We need that. This is how it looks like. Look at the shape, and also have negative correlation. No correlation at all. We get a picture like that. You cannot form any relation to that. And then also we have nonlinear correlation. It took a shape of a quadratic. To some extent, we might have what? We might have a shape like an exponential. So these are the shape that we are familiar with. Right, same under the grade 12, we have a regression line as well as correlation coefficient. We need to know how to determine the equation of the least square regression line. We still remember the formula is y is equals to a plus bx. Y is equals to a plus bx. We need to know how to determine that. Very important. We have determining the value of ab from the least square regression line. We can use the calculator. These are the steps that you must follow on your calculator. The mode, you press mode, and then from there you go to the steps, then you enter. Then you have number 2 there, which will give you a plus bx. Then from there you have 2 columns. Make sure that you enter those 125 each and every time equal sign. Then when you go to the other side, please make sure that you start from the first one on the other y value. AC, please just go through the shift, then to get to the start computation screen. Then from there 5 regression, then you choose the option 1 for A, option 2 for B, and the regression as well will also be there. Right. Then to some extent you will get a question that asks you to draw the least regression line. So this one can be drawn through the points to determine if there is a significant negative or positive correlation on a scatter plot. A line of best fit will not represent the data perfectly, but it will give you an idea of the trend. Very, very important. Now, the line of best fit is also called the regression line. This line will always pass through the mean x as well as y. X mean is the mean of the x value, and then y, that will be the mean of the y. So it's always passing through that point. Now, if you are required to draw the regression line, so very important, first you need to calculate the what? You need to calculate the mean x for the x, and then the mean of the y values. Right. Last one here then will be the correlation coefficient. Very important, we need to calculate that. We still follow the very same procedures, but now instead of choosing 1 and 2 now, we are going to choose 3 when we get to number 5. Then the 3 will represent the what? The 3 will represent the regression. You can see now it will start with what? We'll start with R. Very important. Now keep in mind the properties. The correlation coefficient is a number between -1 and 1. It is greater or equals to or less or equals to 1. So we've got the strong positive, we've got the strong negative, we've got the moderate, we have no correlation at all. Keep that in mind so that we are able to comment about the strength of the data. It is very, very important. These are the type of the examples that you can practice. Please make sure that we have many of them, different even where to some extent the graph is already sketched for you, then you're able to interpret from the graph. Please, grade 12, practice this type of questions so that at least you are ready when you go for the trial examination on Monday. This is the second one where the graph is also sketched for you. Calculate the equation of the least square regression. Understand the question, very important. Comment on the trend of the data. Predict the final mark of a student who was absent for 4 Saturdays. So this one we can use the very same formula, that equation that you obtained in 4.1. Okay, thank you. Before we go to analytical geometry then, just to consolidate what we spoke about, I'm just going to give you 2 minutes to consolidate it, and then after that now we're going to go straight away to analytical geometry, which takes plus or minus 40 marks. Right, welcome grade 12. Yes, like I indicated earlier on, the first part of statistics, well completed. Please make sure that you give it enough time, you revise, and this is where you need to score a lot of marks. Make use of the calculator. Please, you know how to use the calculator. That is very, very important. Right, the second part that you look at now is analytical geometry. Right, under analytical geometry, remember the maximum mark that you can get, plus or minus what? Plus or minus 40 marks. Yes. Now we've got the linear analytical geometry as well as the circular analytical geometry. We know very well what am I referring to here. But now, maybe on the circular analytical geometry, I must indicate that we have 2 circles, the one that is centered at the origin and the other one that is centered at any point. Keep that in mind. Right. Very important to know the properties of quad. Very, very important. You need to know the properties of a rectangle. You need to know the properties of a square, parallelograms. Those are very, very important, because if they ask you to prove if the 2 lines are parallel, if you don't know the properties, then it becomes very, very difficult. Right? Please make sure that you go and study those properties. Right, the concept to master here, very important. The first one that we'll learn in grade 10 is the distance formula. Right, the distance formula, we use it in 2 ways to find the distance between the 2 points. Remember, you need to have the 2 points before you can use the formula. And then we can also have what? They can give you the distance and then ask you to find the one of the x or y, one of the unknown. It's very important. You have 2 points, then on 1 point you find that you don't have x but you have y. But because the distance is given, then you're going to use the distance formula. This is the distance formula that we have. Please, it is there in the formula sheet. Make sure that you know how to use it. Right, and then we have the midpoint. We know the midpoint formula, there it is. Then we use the midpoint to find the midpoint of the line segment. Very important, 2 points here as well. You need to have the 2 points to determine the midpoint. And then the other one, finding the unknown if a pair of coordinates and a midpoint are given. So it means if you are required to determine another point, then it means you'll have 1 point and the midpoint, then you'll be able to determine the other point. Very, very important. That is why now you need to know the properties of quad, because they will ask you to determine the coordinates of D if A, B, C, D is a parallelogram. Now, if you can't remember the properties, then it will be very difficult for you to determine the coordinates of what? The coordinates of D. Then interpret the meaning of the midpoint in a given diagram. Very, very important as well. Please make sure that you master this part, but I must emphasize the importance of knowing the properties of quad. Right. Then we also have the gradient. This is the gradient formula. I always say to the grade 12 that you need to know when do you use the formula. I only use the formula if I have the 2 points, right? If I have the coordinates of A and I also have the coordinates of what? The coordinates of B. Then that is where then I will say y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Then I use the formula that, right? But there are instances where they will mention that find the equation of B if B is parallel to CF, then it means now you need to remember for a parallel line, the gradients are the same. M1 is equals to M2. Then the perpendicular lines, then the product of M1 multiplied by M2 is equals to a -1. Let's keep that in mind. Gradient, I need to have 2 points. Now if I have 1 point, I need to check the word parallel, or I need to check the word perpendicular. Very, very important. Right, the angle of inclination, very, very important. we need to make sure that we know how to find the angle of the inclinations and the other angles as well. So this is the formula that we use. The tangent of theta is equal to the gradient. That is the most important one. The gradient the tangent of theta is equal to the gradient. In this case, it will be the gradient of the line AB, because the angle of inclination, remember, we say is the angle that the x-axis formed with the line. Please, we take the positive x-axis, not the negative one. Okay, right. This is where we have the positive gradient. Keep that in mind. If the gradient is positive, then it means our angle there will be an acute angle. The angle of inclination will be less than 90 degrees. Then we can see now that our angle here, it is less than 90 degrees, right? Therefore, the reference angle is equal to the angle of inclination. You see, so this with the reference angle is the same as the angle of inclination. Okay, then we also have a case where we have a negative gradient. Therefore, gradient there is less than 0. Therefore, the first thing that we need to do is to find the inverse of what? Inverse of that gradient. Since the gradient is negative, grade 12, since the gradient is negative, then first you need to determine what? You need to determine the reference angle. Now, we said the angle of inclination is the angle formed by the positive x-axis with the line. Then it means we are referring to this angle here, which is angle theta. For me to get theta, I need first to determine what? The reference angle. Then after getting the reference angle, therefore the angle of inclination then will be theta plus the reference angle is equal to 180. That is what? That is the angle on the straight line. Very important. And then I can get that. Remember here, we are working with what? We are working with a positive angles. Now, if you take what? If you take the negative angles, then you substitute it in here. The negative gradient, you substitute it in here. You are going to get the negative angles, right? Please, let us calculate it correctly. Your gradient is negative. First, you calculate the reference angles, and then after that now, the theta plus the reference angle is equal to 180. Then you minus it from 180. Then it will give you the size of angle, angle theta. Okay. Then before I pass the gradients as well, I must also indicate that we have a collinear points. We have a collinear points. Grade 12, you need to make sure that you understand this one. When you are referring to the collinear points, you are referring to the points that lies on the same straight line. We are referring to the points that lies on the same straight line. Now, if that is the case, therefore the gradient of AB will be equal to the gradient of BC. Or the distance of AB plus the distance of BC is equal to the distance of AC. But now, let's focus on the gradient. Because to some extent, we sometimes make mistakes on this one. If I were to make an example, if we are having a line like this one, and then we have A, you have B, you have C, and finding that on A, B, and C, you've got the coordinates of A, it's A and B. I cannot use this one. Let me use the example that we will understand. Okay, this is the line. Then I have A, I have B, I have C. Finding that you are only given the coordinates of A is 1 and minus 4, and then the coordinates of B then will be 3 as well as 1. Then you are asked to determine the gradient of AC. You are asked to determine the gradient of C. The mistake that we do as a grade 12 learner sometimes, we want first to determine the what? We want first to determine the coordinates of C. In whereby now we assume that B is a midpoint. Grade 12, no. Like I said, ABC is on the same straight line. Therefore, what must happen is I know that the gradient of AB is equal to the gradient of what? The gradient of AC. Therefore, once I have the gradient of AB, then the gradient of AB is the same or equals to the gradient of what? Gradient of AC. Please, let us make sure that we keep that in mind. Because most of the time, we want to calculate the coordinates of C. And then, that way, then we are getting it wrong. Okay. Right. Then from there, we still have to find the equation of a line. Then, for you to determine the equation of a straight line, you remember the equation of a straight line is y is equal to mx plus c. You need to have the gradient and the intercept, the y-intercept, to be specific. But now the knowledge of a parallel and perpendicular lines are very important. We know that for parallel lines, M1 is equals to M2. Then for perpendicular line, the product M1 multiplied by M2 is equals to a -1. So please, every time you check, if you are asked to determine the equation of a straight line, then what you need to check on that line, do you have 2 points? If you don't have 2 points, then it means you cannot use the formula. Right, you need to check now. It means you have 1 point. If you have 1 point, you need to check if they indicate something parallel or perpendicular. Then if they indicated a parallel, then it means you will take the gradient somewhere. If they said perpendicular, then you take the gradient somewhere, then multiply by the gradient of this line, you must get the -1. Please, grade 12, keep that in mind. And then we must not forget that the tangent is perpendicular to the radius. Keep that in mind, especially now when we get to what? When we get to grade 12 analytical geometry. Right, this is an example that you need to get. Remember, we said these are only the line. These are only the line grade 10 and grade 11. Please keep it in mind. I must also say, right, when we are determining the coordinates of a point, yes, I know that most of the time we check what? We check the midpoint, right? We check the midpoint. But if you see that you cannot use the midpoint, what must you do? Remember, where the line AB intersect with line AD, then at this 2 points, these two lines are equal. It means for me to determine the coordinates of A, then I can do what? I can determine the equation of AB, then also determine the equation of AD. Then I equate the two together, then solve, then I'll get the X as well as Y. Please, if you can't use the midpoint, then check. If you can't have the two equations, then equate them together and solve for X as well as Y. But very important to read what? Very important to read the statement. Okay, these are the questions. And now 3.2 prove that AB is perpendicular to BC. The two lines will only be perpendicular if gradient of AB multiplied by the gradient of BC is equals to -1. Please, let us not conclude first grade 12. Sometimes because you already know that they must give you -1, you start with the -1. No, first find the gradient of AB, then after that determine the gradient of BC. Now you multiply the two together. If they give you -1, then you can conclude to say the gradient of AB times the gradient of BC is equals to -1. Therefore, the two lines are perpendicular to each other. Very, very important. Okay, right. The grade 12, we've got the equation of a circle. We know that that equation is given by x minus a squared plus y minus b squared is equals to r squared, whereby a and b are the center of the circles. Please keep that in mind. Right, what is important here is you must be able to determine the equation. Remember, at the beginning of analytical geometry, I said that we've got two circles. The one circle is centered at origin and the other one is centered at any point. Fine, the formula can work because the one that's centered at origin, the value of A will be 0 and the value of B will also be what? Will also be 0. But you need to determine the equation, very important. Okay, and you also be able to determine what? You also must be able to determine the equation of the tangent. Right, now this is how we determine the radius. Just make the r as the subject of the formula, then we get r is equals to the square root of that. Okay, now this is the example that I was seeing earlier on. Finding the equation of the circle, we must have the center and the radius, very important. Then if it is centered at any point, but if it's centered at origin, you only need a point. Please make sure that you familiarize yourself with that so that at least we are ready. Right, remember the equation of the circle to some extent, you can get it like ax squared plus bx plus cy squared plus dy plus e. You must be able to move from this equation to this form to the center radius. It means, how do you do that one? Practice, complete the square. By completing the square, you'll be able to move from this form to the center radius. Very, very important. Then from there, then you are able to determine the equation. If the radius is not given, then you will have a point on that circle. Then you start first substituting the what? Start first substituting the center, and then after that to get r, then you substitute the point on the circle. Then from there, the equation of the tangent is just a straight line, but what is important here is that the tangent is perpendicular to the radius of the diameter. So it means we have to apply m1 multiplied by m2 first. You determine the equation of what? The equation of the radius, or you determine the equation of the diameter. Then after that, you know that the gradient of the radius multiplied by the gradient of the tangent is equals to -1. Then you have the gradient of the tangent. Please keep it in mind, grade 12s. Okay. Right now, the other thing that we need to look into is given the two circles of the center A and B respectively. It can be determined if the circles are touching externally one point of the intersection. Then, like the picture says, here we are. So it means if the circle intersect at one point, then it means the distance AB from the centers will be the same as R1 plus R2. Keep that in mind. And then from here, if they touch internally, then it means 2 points of intersection. Then we have AB. Then AB now will be less than R1 plus R2. R1 plus R2 greater than AB. So it means now the two circles will touch itself at 2 points. Then after this one, if they are not going to touch at all, then obviously now the length between the two radius, A and B, will be greater than R1, the radius of the first circle, plus the radius of the second circle. Please, grade 12, very, very important. Please make sure that you practice. Right, under analytical geometry, like I did the example earlier on, you'll be asked to prove that the angle is 90 degrees. That will be if two lines are perpendicular, or the Pythagoras theorem, or prove or show that line 1 bisects line 2, then prove or show that line 1 is perpendicular to the line 2, then otherwise show that the line 1 is parallel to that one, and then finding the unknown if the gradient is given with the perpendicular or parallel lines. And then I must also indicate that to some extent, remember grade 12, we can also use the angle of inclination to determine what? To determine the gradient. Please don't forget that. Right, then finding the unknown if points are collinear, we practice that one. And also, if we are given the circle, we must be able to show if a point lie inside or outside of the circles. Please, you need to practice. Those are the common questions that we see most of the time, but we are not saying you focus on the others as well. Make sure that we are ready by Monday. Okay. Right, the angle of inclination and its applications is very, very important here. I indicated earlier on, if the angle of inclination is given, then you can also use it to determine the gradient. Fine. These are types of questions that you need to use to prepare yourself. Very important. Please be able to move from center radius to the other form of a circle, and also move back as well by doing what? By completing the square. I must also indicate that the knowledge of Euclidean geometry, it is very, very important. Every time in the line 1, the grade 10 and 11, try to form a triangle and see if you can determine. Remember, in a triangle, we've got the sum of angle add up to 180 degrees, and we also have the exterior angle is equals to the sum of two interior opposite angles. So try to work around that to see if you can be able to solve the angle in a triangle. Okay, thank you very much. Now, we are going to move to trigonometry. Now, before I go to trigonometry, just 2 minutes as well to consolidate, to make sure that you understand the analytical geometry. Then after the 2 minutes, then straight away now, we are going to move to trigonometry. Right, thank you very much, grade 12. Thank you very much. Now, let's go straight now to trigonometry. The maximum marks was range between plus or minus 40, 43, 41, 42, 39, 36. Please, that is the maximum mark that we can get. But what is it that we need to prepare ourselves when it comes to trigonometry? We need to remember the trig ratios, the identities, trig equations. Remember, we've got under the identities, grade 12, we did the compound and the double angle formulae. And you must also remember to focus on the negative angles, the reduction you name. Then we have trig functions. Then we have 2 and 3D problems. Very important, guys. Let's focus. I'm happy. You know, yesterday you started with statistics after paper 1. So today I know you're going to work on the 2 It's either is Euclidean geometry and something, but let's use it today to make sure that we cover one topic. Right. Let's now look into trigonometry. Right. Under the fundamental identities, we have the sine theta, the tangent of A is equals to sine A divided by cos A. Very important. And then from there, we have the square identity, right? Whereby we have sine squared B plus cos squared B is equals to 1. Then immediately, remember I said earlier on, there are some formulas that are not in the formula sheet. The one like the tangent of A is not there. Please immediately write it in the formula sheet. The square identity not there. Please, you must also at the very same time make sure that you make the sine squared B the subject of the formula. You make the cos squared B the subject of the formula. Please, you write them down so that when we get to trigonometry, then you can have the formula just next to you. Right, the basic definitions of trig, then remember we have the sine, which is the opposite over the hypotenuse, and then the cosine adjacent over the hypotenuse, as well as the tangent, it will be the opposite over the adjacent. Keep that in mind. Remember we said we only apply the definitions in a right angle triangle, not any other triangles. Right, now, if we are having this one in the Cartesian planes, then it means now the sine will be y over r, and then the cos will be x over r, and the tangent then will be y over x, because that is the opposite over adjacent, and then the cos is adjacent over the hypotenuse. Please make sure that you familiarize yourself with this one. And then remember the type of questions here, most of the time you will have two sides, and then you need to determine the third side by using the Pythagoras. Very, very important. And I must indicate that angles are measured upwards from the positive x-axis anti-clockwise. And then up to the hypotenuse. Very important, we go up like that. We are not going clockwise direction, we go anti-clockwise direction. Okay, then the Pythagoras theorems. How do I solve those problems that I was indicated earlier on? Always try to isolate the trig ratios. You've got the 2 sine of theta is equals to 5, you divide by 2, or 5 sine theta is equals to 2, you divide by 5 on both sides, so that you have sine theta is equals to 2 divided by 5. Then you isolate the trig ratio. And then after that, you determine the quadrant. Very important. You would have the trig ratios and you have the restrictions. Theta is element 90 to 270. Please make sure that you select the correct quadrant. Then you draw the what? You draw the sketch and then use the Pythagoras theorem. Very important. These are the steps that you need to follow before you can answer the questions. You make sure that you have the sketch in the right quadrant and then use the Pythagoras to find the missing side. Then after that you can do what? After that now you can answer the question. Right, the reduction formulae, remember from the basic Castle diagrams, very important to know your angle 0 to 90, 90, 180, 180, 270, 270 to 360. You need to know that so that it becomes easy when we get the sine of 360. You know the quadrant where 330 is. It is very, very important. Right, and then in terms of the cast, A is positive in the first, all of them. Sine, cos, tangent positive in the first quadrant, the sine in the second quadrant, the tangent in the third, and then the cos in the fourth. That's where we need to start. And then we also have the reduction formulae, very important. Remember now the reducing all angles to an acute angles, that is the intention of the reductions. So we are having in the first quadrant all the angles are less than 90. That is why it's a theta there. 45, 30, 28, they are less than 90. They are in the first quadrant. And then the next one, then we have what? 180 degrees minus. 180 degrees minus, it is in the what? It is in the second quadrant. Then 180 plus, it is in the third quadrant. And then you also have what? 360 minus. Very important, grade 12. This is where you need to start. I always say now, let's call this quadrant number 2, 180 minus. I don't worry first, is it negative or positive? Where is 180? 180 is in the second quadrant. Then once you have seen that it's in the second quadrant, then you can ask yourself, how is cos in the second quadrant? Then you will see now cos is what? cos is negative. If I've got the sine of 360 minus theta, then I check where is 360 minus. It is in the fourth quadrant. Then how is sine in the fourth quadrant? Then you see that it is negative. Very important. Yes. These are 180, 360, which most of the time I encourage my grade 12 learners to say, when we are dealing with the special angles like 120, 150 to 330, 300, try to focus on, try to use 360 minus, try to use 180 minus, try to use 180 plus, because the focus here is just, you just need to check if it's positive or negative for the special angles. But when you come to the 90s, when you use the co-functions, then there are two things that you need to worry about. When you look at 90 minus, yes, 90 minus is in the first quadrant, right? 90 minus is in the first quadrant. 90 plus is also in the what? 90 plus is in the second quadrant. Please make sure that you understand what is happening. Right, for 90 minus, I must say that if I've got sine 90 minus angle theta, then it means this one I need to remember that, oh, 90 is a co-functions, then I need to change the name of sine to cos. I apply the co-functions here. But now, first quadrant, I know they are all positive. But when I go to the second quadrant, 90 degrees plus, if it's a cos, very important, I need to remember, okay, cos is negative in the second quadrant, then the co-function for cos is sine. Therefore, I must have a minus sine theta. Grade 12, let us make sure that we revise those ones, are very, very important. Right, we also have the negative angles. Negative angles, remember we said we go now what? We go now a clockwise direction. Please let us practice those ones. Let us practice those ones. That is why here we have now what? In the fourth quadrant, we know that it's only cos positive. If I've got the sine of negative a, the cos of negative a, and the tangent of negative a, these are negative angles, then it's only cos that will be positive, sine and the tangent will be negative. Right now, the other one now will be to get rid of that negative, always add 360 to the angle to make it positive. Right? I've got minus. I've got what? I've got a sine of minus 60. I can add 360 on that. It will give me 300. Then I can work with that. Then I will be able to get it. I will be able to get the answer. It will be in the fourth quadrant. Thank you. Right. The other one that I must indicate. Remember here you are also given 360 plus that. It means this angle will be in the first quadrant. You do sometimes get the angles that are more than 360. Please, grade 12, just make sure that you find a way on how to work with that, because most of the time, yes, I've got 520, it is more than 360. It means the first cycle is completed. Now, most of the time, we can just take 520 minus 360, and then you get the angle which is less than 360. Then that one, then you are able to work with. Please make sure that you practice those type of angles. Right, and then from there we have the trig equations. Under the trig equations, these are the basic steps that you must follow. Very important to isolate. I've got 2 sine of theta is equals to 1. Then I divide by 2. I isolate the trig ratios. Then I find the reference angles. And the reference angle, the ratio must be positive. We don't put the negative into the calculator. Then from there, we choose the quadrants. Remember, in the fourth quadrant, the sine is positive in 2, negative into 2. The tangent positive in 2, negative into 2. Please, very important. Then choose the correct quadrants, and then you work with those ones. Okay, the tangent, because of now the period is 180, then we can also have one quadrant. Then the general solution as well. I always say if you master how you know how to solve the trig equation, the general solution will just only to do what? Just to add the period, k times the period, then you are making the solution general in number of what? In number of cycles. Please let us make sure that we practice, and don't forget to indicate that k must be the element of what? K must be the element of the integers. It's very, very important. But grade 12, if I get this type of questions, I will celebrate. Most of the questions that we get, but this most of the time falls under what? Under the trig functions, whereby now I've got only sine theta and the cos theta. Now, what must I do in these situations? Then I know that sine and the cos, if I've got sine and the cos with the same angles, then I divide both sides by the cos to get the tangent. I look at the angles. If the angles are the same, I divide by cos, and I know that sine over cos is equals to the tangent. Thank you. Then from there, if I've got the co-functions, here what I do, especially on functions, I must indicate. Then what I do now, the sine and the cos with different angles. The two now, the angles won't be the same. If the angles are the same, I divide by cos. But if the angles are not the same, then I'm going to introduce now what? I'm going to introduce the co-function with 90 degrees minus. I'm going to introduce the co-functions now with 90 degrees minus in one of the two. Then the angle you change is your reference angle. Now if I change now, let me make an example very quickly. Now if I have the sine of 2x is equals to the cos of 30 degrees minus x. So it means the angle that I'll be working with then will be the one that I change. So now I take this one, it will be sine of what? Sine of 90 degrees minus into what? Minus into 30 degrees. 30 degrees minus what? Minus x. I put this in there. I put this into the brackets. It's a sine of 90 minus 30 degrees minus x. So that then when I simplify, then I get sine of 90 degrees plus minus 30 degrees, then plus x. Then I'm able now to work with this one, whereby now I have now sine of 90 degrees. Not 90 minus that will be 60 degrees in Parma, will be 60 degrees, then plus x. Then I can simplify this one, but this one then will be my reference angle. Then from here now I check, okay, this is positive, then the sine is positive in the first quadrant as well as the second quadrant. Very, very important. Please make sure that you practice this type of questions where now you need to change the co-functions. Right. Now, factorizing, very much possible. Please let us make sure that we look at this type of questions. Solve as you would in a quadratic. Remember how you solve the quadratic equations? Very, very important. Then this is the same. But I always say when I have the sine of 2x or the cos of 2x plus sine, you cannot work with x and y in the same equation. You change them so that you have only cos or you have only sine. Please, that is very, very important. Right. Note specific solutions. Sometimes you are asked to find the solutions in the interval minus 362 to 360. Please, very important to choose an integer value for k. Then you substitute them. Then whatever the solutions that you get, it must be between what? Between the interval that the question is asking. Very, very important. Okay. Right. These are the type of examples that you must look into. And please make sure that you practice the identities. Guys, there are a lot of marks on the identities. We practice and then we make some mistakes on the what? We make some mistakes on the reduction as well in terms of sign. Let us make sure that we practice those ones. Right. Trigonometric graphs. These are the basics one. You know the graph of sine, you know the graph of cos, you know the graph of the tangent. The key points here on the sine and the cos will be the x-intercept and the turning point at every 90 degrees. The period of the sine, we have a complete period at after 100 and what? 360 degrees. Now, very, very important. The amplitude is what? It's 1. The minimum value minus 1. The maximum value is 1. Both graph sine and cos are the same. The maximum value 1. The minimum value minus 1. But when we come to the tangent, the key points here is that in every 45 minutes, every 45 degrees, not 45 minutes, yes, 45 degrees. Right now, we will have our x. Then from there, the period, we have the complete shape in 180 degrees. Therefore, I need now to remember that no amplitude can be defined here. Then we have the asymptote that x is equals to 90 plus k times 180. We need to remember that. Okay, this is how we determine the amplitude. Then the amplitude, remember, it stretches the graph upwards. Then we've got horizontal shift. Then it's the x plus p. Then x plus p, it says the graph will move p units to the left. If it's x minus p, the graph will move p units to the right. Very important. And then also the vertical shift is a plus q, the graph will go up. And then minus q, the graph will go down. If q is greater than 0, it's upwards movement. If q less than 0, is a downwards movement. The period, very important. We do make some mistakes here. I have y is equals to sine of bx. So it means for me to get a period, I take 360 divided by the value of b. Then it will give me the period of that. Right, there are these questions that will get determine the value of x for which the identity will be undefined. Very important, grade 12, for us to have undefined, then it means the denominator must be what? Must be 0. Very important. It means I will take the denominator equal to 0, and I must also check if there is a tangent on that identity. Why so important? Because the tangent we said earlier on, it has the asymptote at x is equals to 90. Right, these are the questions that you must look into. This one is under 2D and 3D as well. Remember, we've got 3 formulas under 2D and 3D. The first one will be the sine rule, the second one is a cosine rule, and the third one then is the area rule. Very important. Please make sure that you look into that and you know the conditions. When do I use the cosine rule? When do I use the sine rule? And also, when do I use the area rule? Don't forget in that, you know what, I can also still use the trig ratios here, whereby now if I have a 90 degrees, then I know that that is the right time to use the trig ratios. These are the type of questions that you must prepare yourself and make sure that you do your best on this question. Okay, that is the end of the trigonometry, and then please make sure that you practice, and then you understand what is happening here. Okay, right. Yes, I'm looking at time now. I'm just going to give you a time just to consolidate, and then after that, then we will just see, because now we have Euclidean geometry. Just to summarize it very quick, and then after that we'll be done. I will be sure that you are ready for the final examination on Monday. Right, thank you. Because of time, grade 12 now, we need now quickly to look at Euclidean geometry. Very important, a lot of marks there, very, very important. Now we've got grade 11 and grade 12. Circle Euclidean geometry, grade 11, and then we have similarity and proportionality theorems in grade 12. Right, very important. Be able to study the theorem in ways that makes it easy for you to recall and to draw the structure in your mind, and then to know how to prove the theorem is very important. Then apply the theorem to solve the riders and give the correct acceptable reasoning. We need not to familiarize ourselves with the correct reasoning in Euclidean geometry. Right, I'm not going to go through this one. In grade 11, we know the 4 theorems that are examinable. So the first one, the line drawn from the center of the circle perpendicular to the chord, angle at the center to a angle at the circumference, the opposite angle of a cyclic chord, and the tan chord theorem. Those are the theorem that you must know how to prove them. Very important. Under grade 12, it's the similarity as well as the proportionality. Those are the 2 theorems that you must know how to prove. Please, grade 12, if grade 12 I know 2 of them, then chances are I will get 1. Then it means I already scored 5 marks on that. Please make sure that you cover that work. Right, I think by now your teachers have already indicated to you that we can group the theorems according to the different groups. The group 1, the center theorems, the group 2, 4 points on the circle, and the group 3, the one that talks to the tangent. Please try to have that structure, because at the end of the day, when you read the statement on the before you can look at the circle, then you are able to identify the group that you'll be dealing with. Very, very important. Right. Let me quickly go through the hints when answering Euclidean geometry questions. Very important to read the given information, and while we are reading, please mark on the diagram if not already done. That is why we say every time try to have different colors, so that at least you read, you indicate that information on the diagram if it is not there. Right, please do not assume anything here. If it is not given or marked on the diagram, it is not true unless proved. Do not assume. Make sure that whatever you see, it is either marked on the diagram or it's on the statement. As you prove angles equal or calculate angle, mark them on the diagram as well. Very important. The angle ABC was not in the diagram. You just calculate it. Now, please write it back so that it is when you go to the next question, then it is very easy for you to work on it. And then write down the statement and the reason there and there. Sometimes you only write, especially now in terms of after grouping, you see the angles. Oh, angle at the center is twice angle at the circumference. Please give the reason. So this is 20. The reason for me, angle at the center is twice angle at the circumference, or the opposite angle of a cyclic quad. Make sure that by the end of the question, you have used all the given information. That is very important. If you are asked to prove something, yes, whatever they are asking you to prove, it is true. The only thing that you need to do, for example, if you are asked to prove that ABCD is a cyclic quad, then it is cyclic quad. But if you can't, then remember that you can use it in you can use it as one in the next part of the question. I'm going to repeat. If you are asked to prove something, prove that ABCD is a cyclic. Yes, it is a cyclic name. But if you can't prove it at that question, but in the next question, please make sure that you use it. Name. Please make sure that you use it. And I must also advise to say, if you're asked to prove that ABC is a cyclic and you find that you have used the opposite angle, you cannot give the reason as an opposite angle of cyclic quad. It's either you say the converse, very important to include the converse opposite angle of a cyclic quad. Right, these are the examples. Please make sure that you practice up until you understand. Grade 12, I must say for each topic, please give yourself a minimum of 3 different question papers. You must go to the 6 because you need time, but give yourself a minimum of 3 different question papers on that specific one, on that specific topic. Very important. You need to know how to manage your time, because sometimes I do not finish, say, because of what. Please remember, for each mark, your time is by 1.2. To know, okay, on this question, I need to spend 15 minutes. Very important. And do not go to the exam room without a calculator, the ruler, the pencil, and different colors, especially now in paper 2. We need different colors that we will need to use in the diagrams. So have enough sleep. Make sure that you eat the breakfast in the morning. And you must be relaxed when you go for this one. Do not panic. You need to make sure that you are ready mentally, everything. And then you know the structure of the paper. We indicated earlier on that the knowledge, the challenging one, you know those ones that are challenging. You have a plan for them. How do I approach these questions? Very, very important. And then follow the instructions. Know how to use your calculator, especially in question 1 in the statistics. Know how to use your calculators. Very, very important. Right, and then I want to say thank you, grade 12, and then good luck with your examination on Monday. I know that you're going to do your best, and this will be your last paper of mathematics. Thank you very much.